All right, friends, we're going to go ahead and get started as a few of our other friends jump on. My name is Carrie Lichty, and I'm the Assistant Director of Marketing and Communications here at the Louisville Institute. And you are here for our 2025 Postdoctoral Fellowship webinar. So just kind of how this is going to be, we're going to talk a little bit about the program itself, how it works, all the details. You'll notice the chat is turned off. However, we are happy to answer questions using the Q&A. So you can pop questions in the Q&A at any time. If there are questions that are specific, I will try and answer them during the time, but we may hold off on some of them until the end if they think they're more relevant to the whole group. So chances are we're going to cover most of your questions during this time. We are going to be mindful of your time. So we will keep this to about 30 minutes, and we will stay on for a few minutes afterwards to answer any additional questions. But please do use that Q&A section throughout the time for answering questions. I'll also be dropping links in the chat. So if you need links to the documents, the website, anything like that, I'll drop those in there. Now I'm going to pass it over to Amy Moiso, who is our Associate Director here at the Louisville Institute, and she is the Program Officer for the Postdoctoral Fellowship. So take it away, Amy.
Thank you, Carrie, and welcome everybody. We're excited to share with you about the Postdoctoral Fellowship today. I'm imagining most of you are somewhere in your last year or year and a half of your PhD program, so congratulations for getting this far. If you're already done, even more congratulations, but I imagine most of you are finishing up. So we're excited to share this opportunity with you as you're looking forward to what comes next for you after your dissertation is finished. So let's talk about the 2025 Postdoctoral Fellowship from the Louisville Institute. First, a little bit about the Institute itself. Our mission is to bridge the church and academy, and we do that mostly through awarding grants and fellowships, of which this is one, the Postdoctoral Fellowship. And it applies to those who lead and study North American religious institutions, practices, and movements. So we're talking about academics and people who are working in churches, who are pastors or pastoral leaders. And we promote scholarship that strengthens the church, academy, and society, and ultimately contributes to the flourishing of the church. So we love to talk about being that bridge where people gather between church and academy, which is not so common necessarily in the academy. If you're somebody who loves the church and cares about the church, it's not always a place that you can find that kind of welcome for both halves of yourself, the academy and the church. But the fellowship is one of those places, and the Louisville Institute is one of those places. So we have 6 grant and fellowship programs: the Pastoral Study Project grant, the grant for researchers, the first book grant for scholars of color, and then 3 fellowships: the Doctoral Fellowship, the Dissertation Fellowship, and this one, the Postdoctoral Fellowship. So what is the Postdoctoral Fellowship? Let's talk about that. So first of all, if you haven't done so yet, make sure to go to our website and download the Postdoctoral Fellowship application guide. It looks like this, so you have a little picture of it in front of you. And as I go through this demonstration of the different aspects of the fellowship, I'll be referencing this guide. So if you have it in front of you or have the PDF in front of you, you can kind of follow along. If you don't have it in front of you, it's okay. You can download it later. I think Carrie's going to put that link in the chat for you so that you can have access to it. But if you do have it in front of you, then you can follow along. So this is page 1 of the guide. It talks about the real basics of the application process. So what are postdoctoral fellowships? This is on page 2 of the guide. First of all, our fellowships are vocational and professional formation for early career theological educators. I'm going to define all those words as we go along, but for now, that's sort of the broad piece. Like, this is not merely a job, not merely a place to get experience teaching, but it actually has a formation component for folks who are really interested in theological education as a vocation. That said, these are officially 2-year placements as a visiting scholar at a graduate theological school, college, or university, or an education or research organization. And all those placements are in the United States and Canada. I'm going to talk about all these more in detail, but for now, the thing to remember is there are sort of 2 components to the fellowships. There's the formational aspect, which is participation in a bunch of different things related to formation. And then there's the actual placement as a scholar at a school where you're going to be able to teach for 2 years. Who's eligible for our fellowships? This is always an important question. This is in the guide on page 3. So first of all, we're really talking about early career religion scholars in the United States and Canada. You need to be based here. So you do not have to be a US citizen, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but you do need to already be in the United States or Canada. We unfortunately do not have the capacity to bring you here from somewhere else. So you need to be already here. We need you to complete your PhD or your THD by June 30th, 2025. That is just a hard deadline for us so that we know that you're going to be prepared to start teaching in the fall of 2025 in your postdoctoral fellowship. So we'll talk a little bit more about that too, but have that date in mind, June 30th, 2025. If you're thinking you're going to be done by then, this is the fellowship for you. We're looking for folks who demonstrate appreciation for the Christian church and a commitment to theological education. So we're talking about folks who really care about what happens to the future of the church, about why theological education and education in general is important for the church and for the future of Christianity. So that's kind of the pool of folks we're looking for. That said, you can work in a lot of different fields. So you could be in history, systematic or practical theology, pastoral studies, social sciences, sociology of religion, ethics, biblical studies, or you can work interdisciplinarily. We're happy to have all kinds of different fields of study as long as you have this approach toward theological education and the future of the Christian church. So we don't have parameters, strict parameters around what fields you can be in. So what's included in the postdoctoral fellowship? What does it look like? Here are the basics. This is on page 1 and 2 of the guide. First of all, you're going to have a 2-year teaching placement as an assistant visiting professor. There are a couple of exceptions to this where we place you in something where you're doing maybe a hybrid kind of professor and programmatic role, but most of the time we're talking about a 2-year teaching placement where you're going to be teaching in theological education or something similar above the secondary level, right? So this is higher education placements. That you'll have a minimum $50,000 a year stipend. These are negotiated depending on the school and the cost of living with the school. We do that negotiation for you, so you don't have to worry about that. But you know going in that you'll have at least $50,000 a year stipend. You will also have at no cost to you health insurance, housing, and moving expenses. So those are in addition to the $50,000 a year. And you'll be participating in the Vocation of the Theological Educator Initiative gatherings, which are part of that formation that I was talking about before. I'm going to say a little bit more about that in just a second. And finally, you will have faculty and pastoral peer mentorship in your site. So wherever you land in the country or in Canada, in the US or Canada, you will have faculty and peer mentorship local to you so that you can engage in that mentorship throughout the process of the fellowship. So I mentioned the Vocation of the Theological Educator Initiative. What is that? So this is on page 4 of the guide. VTE is a vocational formation program rooted in the belief that theological schools and churches in North America need teachers and scholars who are attuned to the life of the church and the life of the scholar. So again, we're talking here about that bridging of church and academy. Why is theological education important to the church? Why is the church important to theological education? The folks who tend to be part of our fellowship programs are the ones who stand on that bridge, who are in the middle of the two. VTE participants are often ordained pastors or leaders in their religious communities. You do not have to be, but it is pretty common that at some level folks are leaders in their communities. So just so you know the sort of nature and culture of the kind of group you'd be part of, that's pretty common. The VTE program brings postdoctoral and doctoral fellows. So doctoral fellows are in their first or second year of their program, their PhD program, when they become fellows. And we gather everybody together, all the cohorts together 3 times a year here in Louisville. And we have professional development pieces, conversation, discernment, collegiality, and lots of fun. So that happens 3 times a year. So 6 gatherings over the course of your 2-year fellowship. Okay, just to be a little clearer here, what do we mean when we're talking about theological education, right? A lot of times we think of that primarily as a seminary or divinity school training pastoral pastors and priests basically for futures in church life. And we do mean that, but we mean it a little bit more broadly. So for us, theological education encompasses the academic study and teaching of religion, clearly important, and its practices. So how are we living out the religions that we practice, in particular Christianity, as well as formation for ministry and other things, leadership, social justice, and public service, nonprofit and other agency work, etc. So when we talk about theological education, yes, we're primarily talking about schools accredited by the Association of Theological Schools, but we're also talking about institutions of higher education that are training people and forming people for a variety of kinds of leadership in ministry that can include all of these other aspects of what ministry can mean: social justice, public service, etc. So it's a little bit broader than just you're going to go teach in a seminary. And we do have some options for those of you who have interests beyond strictly seminary teaching. All right, quick rundown of the timeline. So this is what we're looking at. Your fellowship would start a year from now in the fall of 2025 and go through the spring of 2027. That's the 2 years that you would be teaching. Your applications are due this October 15th, 2024. They're due at 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. For those of you who really like details, that's when they're due. We announced the awards in the spring, the final completed placements, and we'll talk about those in a second. And you need to finish and defend your dissertation by June 30th of next year. So make sure you write that date down. The vocation of the theological educator gatherings that I just mentioned are in October of 2025, February, May, and October of 2026, and February and May of 2027. You do not have to remember those. They are all in the guide. Okay, so speaking of the guide, how do you apply for any of these things? These are all the things that you need to know on pages 5 through 11 of the guide. First of all, download that guide. Read it through carefully so you know what you need to prepare. Second thing you're going to do is create an online profile in our application portal. The links are on our website. They're also in the guide. Easy to find and create a profile. You need to make sure your advisor thinks you're going to finish your dissertation by June 30th, 2025 too. So the idea here is we're going to ask for a recommendation letter from your advisor, and you need to have a conversation with that advisor prior to asking them for a recommendation letter to make sure they say, yes, I think this person's going to finish by June 30th, because we do get letters where the advisor's like, not really sure. And that comes as kind of a warning flag for our selection committee. So make sure to talk to your advisor before you apply to ensure that they feel confident that they can say this in the letter. And then prepare all your application materials and submit them by October 15th, as we said. Speaking of letters, we will ask for an advisor letter of recommendation and another mentor or colleague letter of recommendation. Those are not due till October 22nd. So what happens is when you apply and submit all your materials, you will give us the addresses of those folks who you're going to have write your letters of recommendation. We then send out an email to them asking them to submit those letters, and they have a week to submit them past the deadline. So just to be clear, you don't have to have the letters by October 15th, but you need to let us know when you apply who those letters are going to come from, and then they have a week to complete that. If you have any questions about any of these things at any time, send an email to fellowships@louisville-institute.org. That is our email for all things fellowship. It goes directly to Carrie, so it's not going to some anonymous source somewhere, but that is the way to get your questions answered about fellowships. And if you have any application questions or issues with the online portal or website stuff or anything else, she's the one to send those messages to. All right, what do we want in your application? This is in the guide, pages 9 to 10. First of all, we're going to ask you general information. Name, address, phone number, that kind of stuff, demographic things, where you went to school, blah, blah, blah. All those regular things that you have to put down for everything these days. And we're going to ask a little bit about your dissertation. It's not a primary aspect of your application, but we're going to ask a little bit about that just to hear more about who you are. The core of the application is an essay. It's not a long essay, only 1,500 words, 5 to 7 pages. But it's really the core of how we're going to get to know who you are. This essay is not so much about your scholarship or proving how much you've done in the academy as it is about you and your care for theological education. Why does theological education matter? And how does your life story connect with the story of theological education? So we're really thinking about, like, why do you want to teach? Why do you want to be involved in the education of pastoral and ministry leaders for the future? Why do you care about the church? And how does that intersect with your own vocational life and your own experience of being in theological education as a student and participating in teaching as a student, or being a pastor previously and moving into a PhD program, whatever that looks like? We want to see those intersections and those connections. So after you've put together your essay, we want a transcript too. Unofficial or official is fine. We need a CV and a resume, no more than CV or resume, no more than 4 pages. We do not need everything you ever did. Just pick your top things and send us to us in 4 pages. And those 2 letters of recommendation that I mentioned before, one from your advisor and one from another mentor or colleague in the academic world. So I already talked a little bit about the essay, but I'll say a little bit more here. What makes a strong application? There's a few different things, and I'll talk about the essay in just a second. This is on page 7. First of all, read all those application materials and follow the instructions. It's really pretty simple. If you don't follow the instructions, you miss some little detail or something, that's okay. But if you send us a 20-page essay and we've asked for 5 to 7, we're not going to read past 5 to 7. If you send us a 20-page CV and we've asked for 4 pages, we're going to read 4 pages and stop. So make sure you follow the instructions. They do matter. We do pay attention to those. Make sure you're eligible for this. If you don't live in the United States or Canada, we love you, but we're not able to offer you a postdoctoral fellowship. Again, you don't have to be a citizen, but you need to already be here because we can't bring you from somewhere else. It's not part of our capacity here at the Louisville Institute. So you need to be here already. We need you to finish by June 30th of 2025. We need you to do a PhD or a THD, not a DMin. There's a lot of sort of specific eligibility things that you need to be attentive to in the application guide. Just make sure you're eligible before you apply. And here, back to the essay again. Demonstrate an interest in and passion for theological education. Why do you care? Why does it matter to you? And what are the challenges and opportunities of theological education in North America right now? There's so much going on. There's so much in flux. What do you see as those possibilities? We want to hear about that. We want to hear your passion. We want to hear your passion for what you've studied and for how it applies to theological education in the future. So draw connections between your vocational trajectories, your doctoral program. Why did you study what you studied, and how does that matter for theological education? How are these things aligned? Why do they come together in the person that is you, between the church and the academy? And what are some of those trends and dynamics in the church and in theological education that are most interesting and important to you? Get feedback on your proposal from trusted advisors and colleagues. It's a really great idea to write your essay ahead of time and run it by your advisor, see what they think. If not your advisor, then somebody else who maybe has been a postdoctoral fellow before, or somebody else who's trusted in the academy for you, who can look it over and say, yeah, this really sounds like you, and this really sounds like the Louisville Institute. Again, any questions? fellowships@louisville-institute.org. All right, selection and placement process. This is always a big question for people. What does this look like to apply for this thing? And then how do you figure out where you're gonna land at the end of it? So just some basic information. We usually have about 50 to 60 applicants in our pool in a given year. That varies from year to year, but that's usually more or less where we land. We have a selection committee that reviews proposals and will name 10 to 15 postdoctoral fellowship semifinalists. This usually happens in December, so it'll be late in 2024. So applications come in October, they're read from October to December. In December, we named some semifinalists. So you should know before Christmas whether or not you're going to be a semifinalist in this process. We interview the semifinalists in January to think about possible placements. So the staff at the Louisville Institute, me and Carrie primarily, usually do interviews with you all to find out what are your interests, where are you likely to be best placed, what kinds of backgrounds do you bring that could fit with a particular institution, what are your geographic parameters, what's your field of study, what would you like to teach, and then we start matching that with the schools that we know of that are looking for a postdoctoral fellow for this year and what their needs and goals are. So that happens, the interviews happen in January. And then from January, usually through April, we're doing a matching process. It's really us looking at our list of postdoctoral fellows who are our candidates and matching them with the institutions that we know are looking for somebody to come and be a postdoctoral fellow. In the middle of that, we know you're also applying for other jobs. So if you are a semifinalist and you get another job and you take that other job, Godspeed. We want you to find the right place. If you have a job and you have a postdoctoral fellowship, you can choose between them. No harm, no foul. If you decide to go to the other place and not take the postdoctoral placement, it's okay. We really want to help you find the best place for you. So we understand that things are always changing in this last year of your dissertation before you start a new job, and we just roll with it. So that's why this is a matching process that takes time. It's not like you're applying for one particular fellowship at one particular institution. We've got a number of things in the mix that we're trying to find the best place for everyone. We plan on awarding 8 postdoctoral fellowships for 2025. So from that 10 to 15 group of semifinalists, we'll end up placing 8 of those. That may sound like, oh, you're cutting back by half, but actually a bunch of those folks get jobs somewhere else. They decide not to pursue a fellowship, or we can't find a good placement for them that's going to work for, say, their demographic, like where they can move to. Their spouse can't move, so they're stuck in, I don't know, Atlanta or somewhere, can't move to Boston, so they can't take a fellowship. That does happen sometimes. So 8 postdoctoral fellowships is a good number for us to award out of that 10 to 15 semifinalists. All right. Do I get a say in where I'm placed? The answer is yes, you get a say in where you're placed, of course. We want to find a good place for you. So we're not just going to say, here's where you have to go. Here's the only option for you. Here are the parameters. We typically place people at ATS accredited theological schools, sometimes at colleges or universities that are not wedded to a particular religious tradition, and sometimes in hybrid teaching or program-oriented settings. We work with you to figure out what would be the best setting for you, what kind of courses you want to teach, what kind of students you want to teach, and where in the country you'd like to be. We're continually in communication with placement locations. Even now, people are asking us about postdoctoral fellows for next year. They're letting us know, hey, we're going to need a New Testament professor. We're going to need somebody in ethics. And we're in contact with them already. And then we try to find placements that match your interest, your field of study, your style, tradition, your family needs, your geographic preferences with what those placement institutions have offered as their needs. And again, it's a matchmaking process. And we are in touch with you the entire time. And we're in touch with them the entire time. It's a really open process of, here's some stuff that we have as possibilities. Do any of these look interesting to you? Us talking to the placement schools, hey, we've got some candidates. What do you think about these? And it's a back and forth the whole time, but it's all open. It's not a secret where at the very last minute you're going to get like, here's your one option and take it or leave it. It doesn't work like that. It's much more of an open conversation. And anytime you can be in touch with us to sort of touch base and see where things are, see what the possibilities are. If you have the capacity to relocate, you will have more options. So if you are geographically bound and can't leave where you are, we will work with you, but it will be easier for you to find a place if you have the capacity to relocate. And as I said, we communicate with you and with the institutions throughout this placement process. And you'll have the opportunity to suggest ideas in addition to just your preferences. So if there's a school you really want to work at, you can tell us that and we can talk about that possibility. That said, please do not contact any sites yourself. This can really screw up the matching process if we already know, for instance, that they're doing a search for somebody, or we have somebody already in a interview process there, and then they reach out in a different way. It gets confusing. Don't do it. Please do not chat with potential sites. Please talk to us about potential sites that you'd be interested in. If you're in the semifinalist round, we will talk to you about that. We will try and find the best thing for you, but it can mess things up if you jump ahead and try and make those contacts yourself. So please don't do that. All right, some FAQs, and then we'll wrap up and see what questions you might have. Okay, so first of all, do you have to be a citizen of the United States or Canada? I said this before, but the answer is no, but you have to be here. I've said this multiple times because it's a question we get all the time, and I want to be really clear. If you are not a citizen of the United States or Canada, but you are here doing your program, we can work with that. So just so you know, you can be part of this even if you're not a citizen, but we can't bring you from somewhere else. Do you have to be a Christian? This is a really interesting question. So the bottom line is we don't have any statement of faith or commitment that you have to sign or agree to be part of any of our programs. That said, we are also an institution that is supporting the bridging of church and academy. So we expect that you're going to have some kind of knowledge of and commitment to the future of the Christian church, to the future of theological education. It doesn't mean that you have to be a Christian, but you have to be able to articulate why you would want to do this, why you would want to be part of theological education. There are, of course, people who are of different faiths who teach at theological seminaries and divinity schools, and we are very aware of that. So know that we have that flexibility, and also know that we're going to want to see that for anyone, whether you're churchy or not, we're going to want to know why you care about this and why you want to be part of theological education. Do you have to relocate? Again, you do not have to relocate. You will have more options if you can, right? So we'll talk to you about that if you're a semifinalist, figure out what your parameters are, what's possible for you, and try and work out something that's going to work for who you are. How much is my dissertation factored into the application? This is a good question because some places really want to know, like, what have you done in your dissertation and why does it matter? And we do want to know that, but it's secondary to some other things, because what we really want to know is who you are. And the dissertation and your scholarship and your passion for that work is part of who you are. And so that's what we want to hear about. We don't need to know about how celebrated your scholarship has been or a recitation of your resume. That's actually less important to us than who you are and why you care about this thing that you're working on. We want good scholarship. So it's not a question of whether we're going to just give you a pass because you're really passionate. You have to do good work. But beyond that, we want to know why the work is connected to you as a person and who you are as a person. So that's where you should land when you're thinking about your dissertation. This application does request an abstract of your dissertation, but that's really just to tell us about what you've studied and why it matters to you. So when you're thinking about your dissertation, know that it's important, but it's secondary to who you are. We want to know about you and your passions and your interest in theological education. What's a typical course load? So if you are a postdoctoral fellow teaching, it's usually a 2-2, which means 2 fall classes and 2 spring classes. And then usually a faculty committee or student advisees or both. This is negotiated in the spring when we're doing that matching placement. If it's not a semester system, or it's got some other, if it's a school that works on some other calendar, it's the equivalent then of 6 credit hours each semester. So that's roughly what we're talking about. So it's slightly reduced course load so that you can also do some writing during these first 2 years out of your program. So we're trying to protect your time a little bit so that you can do more than just teach, but also get that teaching experience. Will you teach online, in person, or hybrid? The answer is yes. At this point, we have options in any of these areas. So when we're talking to you about placements in the spring, we will have a variety of options depending on which seminary or theological school or institution we're talking about. So at that point, we will also ask you what your preferences are. Do you really like teaching online? Do you like teaching in person? Do you like hybrid? What does that look like? That's part of the conversation we have to find a good placement for you. And then finally, what if I'll defend my dissertation by June 30th, but my graduation date is after that? We'll talk to you about that in the spring. We want to make sure that you are far enough along that you are not having to finish up anything while you're starting to teach. But if you're finished with your dissertation and have defended it by June 30th, we can probably work around that. So just so you know, we will talk to you about that if you're a semifinalist. Make sure your advisor also agrees that you will be done by June 30th. I think that's it on my FAQs. So Carrie, what other questions do you have?
So I've been answering several questions here, but there are several that I just kind of wanted to save for the end. This one is actually a little bit more specific, but could you apply for a postdoc if you have completed a DMin, but also have a PhD in a different field? So in this case, English Lit. If your DMin advisor was vocal about saying the PhD was more at this level of learning and working. So PhD in another field.
So I would say 2 things. One, it depends on how long ago you got that PhD, because the idea is that these are for early career scholars who have not had a chance to work and teach in the academy yet. So if you got your PhD 20 years ago and taught in English Lit for 20 years and then went back and got your DMin, then that's probably not going to be a good fit for this program. And then I would also say, we need to know why you care about theological education. So if your PhD is in a different field and it's not in one of those sort of more traditionally religious fields, we really need to know that you care about theological education. I think you're probably going to be a less competitive applicant than some others in this pool, just because you're going to be in a pool with people who are focused primarily on a vocation as a theological educator. But I'm not going to say absolutely not, you absolutely can't do it. I would say for whoever this person is who's asked this question, they can feel free to send us a message in the fellowships and we can deal more with the specifics of that person's circumstances.
A lot of these are a little bit more general, so that's what I kind of included here. Do you expect fellows to have prior teaching experience?
Ooh, very good question. So
Yeah.
yes, very, very good question. So the answer is no. And the reason is because we know that PhD programs vary in terms of what teaching experience you actually have access to as a PhD student. So some schools require you to be a TA somewhere, and other schools don't let you do it at all. So the idea is if you don't have teaching experience and you feel like that's sort of a gap in your resume or in your experience, talk about the kinds of experiences you have had. So maybe you've taught in other settings that weren't an academic setting. Maybe you've done lectures or webinars or something else that aren't strictly a class, but maybe are part of some other teaching that you did in a church or somewhere else. Talk about those, and then also just say out loud, hey, I wasn't able to do this during my PhD, but I'm really interested in it for XYZ reasons. I really would like to be able to do it. I just didn't get a chance. It's okay to just be honest about that. Don't lie to us about it. Please tell us the truth about your experience. And we can work with that if you can just explain why you would want to do a teaching fellowship now if you haven't had an opportunity to do it already.
Do you ever place folks at the institution they graduated from?
Ooh, that's a good question. The answer is generally not, for obvious reasons having to do with we want you to succeed as an early career scholar, and sometimes it's really difficult to move from the institution where you were a student to being a faculty member, because it's hard for you to be seen in equal measure as a visiting faculty member. So I won't say that absolutely never happens, because I can't remember off the top of my head if it ever has, but it's we tend to avoid that if possible.
What are the prospects of retention in your placement at the end of the 2 years?
That is an interesting question too.
Uh-huh.
So the answer is, it is in no way expected of an institution to hire you on in order for them to get a postdoc, right? There is nothing on our side at the Louisville Institute where we say, if you get a postdoc, we expect you to hire them on later. So there's no expectation on our side that the institution is going to do that because they have a postdoc. However, it happens pretty often because sometimes they'll say, oh, this person's retiring at the beginning of the school year in 2025 in New Testament. We need a New Testament scholar. So we'll get a postdoc for 2 years. And then you go and you're a postdoc for 2 years and they're like, hey, this person's great. Let's keep them on because we had this vacancy in New Testament already. So that does happen. But we are not in the business of making it happen, I guess is the best way to put it. So there are possibilities. It's not a guarantee, and it's not something that we orchestrate on our end.
Apart from teaching, what other kinds of placements do postdocs typically get? How typical are these other kinds of placements?
So first of all the placements have some aspect of teaching. There are no placements that have no teaching whatsoever. However, some of them have teaching in various forms. So you may have a combination of teaching at an academic institution and being a theologian in residence at a church, for instance. I think we had one of those back in the day. You may be placed at an institution that's more like a nonprofit or advocacy organization where you're going to be teaching, but it's not in an academic context, but you're also doing academic level research as part of your placement. So there's always a teaching aspect and there's always an academic aspect. We typically are focused on preparing leaders for theological education. So in any case, the placements are all going to have some umbrella of that theological education. How are we training and bringing up people to lead the church in the future in the broadest sense? So you will always have some teaching. We do not do placements like just where you're going to go work at a nonprofit or going to go work at some think tank. Part of me would like to be able to do that, but that's not a capacity that we have right now.
I will actually kind of answer this a little bit more, just talking a little bit more about the stipend, housing, insurance benefits, and how the negotiations are handled. For instance, do you get a say in housing options, etc. So again, these are all things that happen should you become a semifinalist and should we have a placement available. But to let you know, we're going to make sure that you have the most appropriate. So if you have a family and need family insurance, you need housing for a family, we're not gonna, you will make sure that you have full family coverage, not just coverage for a single for insurance. You will not be put in a studio apartment because chances are if you have a family, it's not going to work. So we will work with the placement site to make sure that you have the appropriate accommodations.
Mhm. And we're on your side in this
Yep.
because we are your advocates to make sure you get what you need. We're not in the business of trying to make the institution give something to the institution. We're trying to get you a good placement and to do right by you. So just so you know, we're on your team for this.
Um, do you have a preference for applicants who are finishing up their PhD programs by June 25, or are you equally interested those who have already been received their PhD like within the past year?
Either one is fine. In that case, we're looking at early career scholars. So if you finished 5 or 10 years ago, you're going to be less competitive, but you finished within the last year or two, you're fine. And those were equally good.
Nope. Uh, good question. If you are awarded a fellowship, but something arises that would make you unable to pursue it, do you ever allow recipients to defer to the next year?
Actually, Carrie, what is the answer on that one?
Yeah,
You don't
actually,
do that,
so
right?
we do not,
Yeah.
but you would be welcome to reapply. But again, it is so let's say you were a semifinalist and you had to pull out in 2025. That does not give you a leg up in 26. You would still be in the applicant pool based on your own merit and compared to everyone else in that applicant pool.
And part of the reason for that is because from year to year, we don't have the same placement options. So for instance, if you, again, I'm just picking on New Testament today just because it's easy, but obviously any field that you're in is fine. If you're a New Testament scholar and you have to pull out in 2025, we may not have an ideal New Testament placement for you in 2026. So you could apply again, but we might not have the same options. So but you're also not, we're not penalizing you if you have to pull out for some reason. You're welcome to apply again. We're not going to be mad at you. You're not going to hurt our feelings or anything like that. So and if you get another job beforehand and you have to pull out because you've got another job, we're very excited. We will cheer you on. If you're in a postdoctoral fellowship and you get a full-time tenure track job halfway through, you can leave the postdoctoral fellowship and take that other job and we won't be mad at you either because we know how this works and we want you to succeed. So that's what we are trying to do for you, is to give you a support network as you're starting this process of moving toward full-time long-term vocation in theological education.
So the next question actually just tagged onto what you just said.
Oh, great.
What happens if a postdoc fellow finds a job during their postdoc?
Yeah.
And Amy just said, we're your biggest cheerleader. So we will work with you. We will work with your new placement sites, and you are always a part of our family. And we will actually work with ways to make sure that you can continue on in your formation process and work through the details there.
Yeah.
But
And it's not uncommon.
nope,
That
not at
we
all.
have somebody, 1 or 2 or 3 people every year who gets a job while they're in their postdoc placement. We're super excited for them, and they can continue on in formation if they choose.
A couple of questions, just application related, that I'll answer. Some answered if they could send the application in before the deadline. Absolutely. It just has to be in by 11:59 on October 15th. That is the cutoff. Anytime before then, the application's open. And there's a question about sending letters of recommendation in before. So once you start your application, you're going to enter in the names and contact information for your recommenders. Soon as you do that, they're going to get an email with a link to submit their letter of recommendation. They have until a week after the application deadline to actually send in their letter, but you can go ahead and take care of all of that. Easy enough. I am not for sure on this. I'm an international student, so if I want to use it for a year to teach which is the OPT, optional practicum training. How does that work? That's not a thing I know. So
This is a visa related question. And the answer is we will work with you to figure out the right visa for you. We've had international students before who have moved into postdoctoral fellowships. We work with the institution to make sure you have the appropriate visa. So we can answer more particular questions about your specific situation, but know that we work with the institution to make sure that visas are secured that are appropriate to the position that you'd be in.
And I actually love kind of this next question. And says, have you placed people in middle age, received the PhD 2 years ago and moving out of full-time ministry? The answer is yes.
Yes, it is.
Absolutely yes, because you bring a different type of experience. You bring a different richness to our cohort groups. So no, absolutely.
I'm looking at these questions now too.
Yep.
Carrie, do you want me to answer some of these?
Sure. Yes. I'm just kind of going down through and there was a couple.
There's one about the kinds of courses that you might teach that would
Yep.
intersect with theology, but not be traditional theological courses like critical race theory, decolonial, postcolonial studies, gender theories, etc. 100%, you are absolutely welcome to apply. We have lots of places that are interested in that kind of stuff. So absolutely, you do not have to be squarely in the center of one of the sort of traditional theological education fields of study, and interdisciplinary stuff is very welcome. So that's an easy one. Let's see. Somebody asked if it was a 12-month placement or a 9-month. That depends on the institution that you're in. Typically, it's 9 or 10 months, depending on the institution. So that just depends on the institution that you're in. Someone asked, other than what I mentioned, what are the most vital applicant aspects? I think what I mentioned are the most vital applicant aspects, so I don't have anything else to add there. Really, the essay is really key. There are some things that can be negatives to you, like if you're not actually going to finish by June 30th, or if you haven't actually completed the application all the way. But otherwise, the essay is really central because we want to know who you are and what you're about, what you're passionate about, and hear what you have to think about theological education, so that we can put together a really vibrant cohort of folks who are going to surround each other in this process and learn from each other and grow together as they discern this vocation of theological education. Let's see.
We have about 2 more minutes. We're going to cut off right at 12:45 with the questions. Amy, there are a couple. There's a visa question and a part-time pastor question.
Yep, I see that. Okay, so the visa one, again, whatever your visa issues or situation is, if you're an international student, we will work with you when you become a semifinalist to figure out how to make sure that you have the appropriate visa. So at this point, you don't have to worry about it. Different individuals have gone for different visas depending on their own status and their own needs. So I think we have somebody this year who's starting with the OTP and moving to something else in their second year. We have somebody else, I think, who's getting the F1. So it varies, and we will work with you to make that happen. And then the question about continuing or taking on a part-time pastor role. So that's something that we would probably negotiate with you as part of the process of finding a placement. We do have people who work in churches while they are postdoctoral fellows. I would suggest that if the intention here is for you to teach and work in an institution full-time, that you not take on a pastoral role during that time. But if you're already in one, we can certainly work around that. And almost everybody in our fellows group who are pastors or preachers are doing pulpit supply, they're participating in churches, they're teaching classes in churches. So there's a lot of overlap between church and academy in the actual fellowship itself. So it's certainly not, you absolutely can't do it. And we'll just talk to you about what that would look like and how to make sure it's sustainable for you.
All right, that is all of our questions. So I want to thank you all for attending. This video will be available in replay later on this week, and we will send you out a link for it. Like I said, you can go to our website and find out all the information. If you have any questions, you hit fellowships at louisville-institute.org. I am the person who answers that. I'm a real person, and we'll get back to you on that. So if you have any questions or unique situations, let us know. We're happy to answer that. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to your applications.